Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching The Political Vigilante. We have a very special guest on the show, President of Independent Voting, Jackie Salit. Jackie, how you doing today?
Really good. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. We have a mutual friend, JB Updike, who I've known for a long time, and he works with open primaries, and he's told me a lot about your work, and hopefully he hasn't told you too much about the problems that I caused when he and I were in high school together. So-
It's come up actually a couple times, I have to tell you.
Well, thank you for still agreeing to do the interview after knowing what I was like when I was 16.
Okay. Yeah,
So you wrote this speech that Bernie should give but probably wouldn't. I read it on my live stream and even posted it as a separate video and added some of my own opinions on it. But for the most part, you wrote this pretty impressive speech, and I'll put the link to that speech in the show notes for any of my viewers if you want to read it. It's a very lengthy, very well-written speech. And it really outlines the thing that so many of us progressives have been like, Bernie gets this movement. He got screwed over in 2016, and we're kind of keep waiting for him to say I'm done with this. And he keeps saying my friend. I mean, the good thing about the debates last night, he didn't at least say my friend Joe Biden. That was
yeah.
so. Tell us. You've obviously been working in independent politics and election reform for years, and tell us what pushed you to write this speech, and yeah, how what and where you're at in terms of after you wrote that speech and then watching Bernie's debate with Biden, the first one-on-one debate last night.
Yeah. I have a lot of empathy for Bernie, and actually, I will tell you that the process of writing the speech made me feel closer to him. I've never met the man. I tried to vote for him in 2016. New York is a closed primary state, and I'm an independent. And so I was not allowed to vote for him, though I did go to my local polling site. I demanded that the elections supervisors give me an affidavit ballot. I cast my vote for him, even though I knew it wouldn't be counted because we're not allowed to vote in the primary in New York. But I felt that I wanted to cast a vote for him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but even then, I I thought this is a man who cares so deeply for our country and who has so many really important political values and principles, but he's in a straitjacket and he can't get out. And so I decided to write the speech after Super Tuesday, and after also seeing the exit polling results from Super Tuesday, which I included some discussion of in the speech, because I couldn't think of another way to try to help Bernie get out of that straitjacket. So I thought maybe, I'm also, in addition to being a political activist, I'm also a playwright and a theater person. So I know something about creating characters who can say the unsayable.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, wow, there's so many things that Bernie Sanders uniquely, given who he is in American political life, could say and really should say, but some combination of can't or won't. And but I wanted to give that to him and also to give it to people who follow him as a way of thinking about, what another pathway might be. So that's what got me started on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was. I mean, it was really eloquent speech, and you did a wonderful job of putting it. I mean, it sounded like him. I've watched many of his videos. I've been to 3 of his campaign rallies just in the last year.
Uh,
Um, Actually, 4, now that I think about it, 3 in California and 1 in Iowa. And you really touched on it. And the I'm glad you brought up the compassion for him, because we all are wondering why we see the sort of gloves off a little bit over the summer when he's like, I wrote the damn bill. And even in the debate last night, he was really trying to corner Biden on, you didn't say you wanted to cancel Social Security, even though there's video that we can all watch right now.
Right.
We wanted to see a little bit more, but he won't call out the corruption of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And he
Right.
just won't do it. He will not do it. And based on the motivation that you just explained to us for writing that speech, how did you see the debate last night?
To be honest with you, I couldn't decide if I was completely bored or completely fascinated. But, so I thought a lot of it was kind of boring because it got into sort of a micro debate about different pieces of legislation and how so-and-so voted on this version of that bill when it came before the House or the Senate or whatever. And, I understand that all of that is a way to, or a handle on how to talk about broader issues. But I just thought at least some of it sort of devolved into like a micro techno conversation that seemed at odds really with the current situation and the current mood in the country, because we're dealing with a major macro crisis at the moment. And yet, they were sort of picking over what year you did or didn't vote for the Hyde Amendment or this kind of thing. And that to me, that just seemed sort of kind of crazy. On the other hand, the thing that I found fascinating about it, honestly, was that it was kind of it was an incredible example of the debate between what we have to do now and the need for systemic change. And both of those things are true. And I thought that, to just speak about it from Bernie's side for the moment, I thought that Bernie is the person who should be able to, given who he is, who should be able to fuse those two things. Because after all, the closer and closer those things come together, namely the what we have to do now imperative and the imperative for systemic change, the closer you are to social transformation. And in some respects, he was trying to argue that that moment is at hand, that in a sense that you can't do one without the other. But he couldn't quite, at least in my experience of watching it, I felt like he couldn't quite get there. And in a way, to go to your point earlier, to me, that was just another example of the ways in which he's confined, and he won't take on his own political party, and he won't take on the system that is producing the political arrangement that we have. He's all for taking on the healthcare system, and I get that, and he's got that down pat in a way. But in some respects, given that Biden, in effect, was saying, for the moment, let's go to health coverage for all.
Yeah.
Not just single payer, nobody pays. We're going to take care of this. So in some sense, relative to what we do now, he won the argument and could have said, well, yes, you're exactly right. There are systemic issues that we need to address, but most of all, what we need to address are the systemic problems in our political system. And frankly, the political party that I'm running in and that I've been a part of for my entire political career has some significant issues. And here I'm going to challenge you, Mr. Vice President, to join me in calling for, and then a whole set of things, whether it's opening the primaries so that every American can vote without having to join a political organization as a precondition for that, nonpartisan, independent redistricting. I mean, there's like a whole host of things. And I think that in some ways he's probably afraid to tackle those things. Number one, because it's going to piss off the party. And number two, because he's afraid that the American people can't hear that in the current environment. And I understand that. But that's really the challenge for political leadership today, is being able to fuse the systemic issues and the what do we do now issues, and to give the American people the opportunity to think about and to make demands in both arenas.
Yeah, it's a great point. The thing that I'm so perplexed by is it seems like he's so worried about the Democratic establishment hating him. They hate him. No matter what he does,
Yes.
they hate him. They're like, if Biden
Yes.
loses, they're going to blame Bernie.
Yes.
They won't blame Biden's failed policies. They won't blame his obvious dementia. They won't blame anything. Just like, it was Putin and Jill Stein's fault that Hillary didn't campaign in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Like, it's just so preposterous. Oh, and sexist burn bros. We did that. I forgot. It was all of us. Since
That's
no
right.
women or no people of color have ever supported Bernie. It's just a bunch of bros. Like,
Yeah.
so I don't understand why this, like, they hate you no matter what, man. Just call them out. That's what gets so perplexing to me. After what happened in 2016, I had this sort of, well, there's no reason for him to run again and go through this again unless he's really willing to call it out. And the only person I've seen really call it out was like Tulsi Gabbard. And of course, they shut her out of this last debate. And Bernie didn't even speak up for her, which was really disappointing. She was clearly missed in these debates. When she was on the debate stage, she was like, it was fantastic to hear what she had to say. So I don't know, like, where do you see this? I thought he had an amazing opportunity that he kind of got, but kind of didn't, or kind of took advantage of, but kind of didn't, of saying, like, hey, pandemic, the whole country is quarantined to a certain degree. Everybody was probably watching this, and it was really like, make your case to this large percentage of Democratic primary voters who are still uncertain. They haven't been paying attention. They don't follow politics the way you and I do. And they're just like, who's going to lead me out of this? There's no food in my grocery store. What happens if I get sick? All this swirling questions. And he kind of made that claim, but then didn't. So I don't know. Like, I was cautiously optimistic through this. But again, like you said, he didn't bring up the 750 polling places getting closed in Texas. He didn't bring up the fact that anywhere there's not a paper ballot, Biden suddenly wins when there's double-digit exit poll numbers for Bernie. Like, he didn't bring up any of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, part of it, you see, I think that two things about it. One is, this is a long-standing issue and failure, in my opinion, of the American left, which is that the focus, and Bernie really has been, at the head of this, the focus is moving the Democratic Party to the left, rather than moving the left out of the Democratic Party. And I think that that Bernie has made his choice on that. He made that decision a while ago. And even the circumstances that we're living through, as dire as they are, he paints a very valid picture of, the extent of income inequality, of the instability and uncertainty that ordinary families are facing, as he says, to even be able to put food on the table and get proper health care and all of that. He's very, very outspoken on that, and that's so important. But he believes that the task at hand is to move the Democratic Party to the left, not to create something new, which would not, in my opinion, be a left party in the traditional ideological sense of that, but potentially, not even necessarily a party. I don't happen to be, I have a lot of experience in independent party building, and I'm not a huge fan of party building at the moment, but I am a big advocate of movement building, of third force building and all of that. But Bernie's made a decision on that, and even these circumstances, which arguably he articulates better than anybody, even these circumstances won't don't get him to change his tactical focus. And so, when you raise the question about your expectations and all of that, I think a lot of people do feel that way, but it's just not the path that he's on. And for a whole variety of reasons, he just doesn't seem to have the will or the belief that you could do anything other than the path that he's on. And that's a failure of imagination, frankly. And it's also a failure of, I think, of insisting that we have to hold on to certain ideological categories. I mean, as you know from reading the speech that I wrote, one section of it deals with what you might call a Bernie Bloomberg alliance, not between the two men, but between the voters who supported those two candidates. And first of all, I know Mike Bloomberg. I ran his 3 mayoral campaigns in New York on the Independence Party line. I know the kind of person that he is, and I know the kind of people who support him. And when I looked at those exit polling results, what independents did, what African-American voters did, et cetera, and so forth, which really was very different than the major media narrative said it was. But when I looked at those results, what jumps off the page to me is there is a coalition to be built between the people who are voting for Bernie and the people who voted for Bloomberg. They have more in common than they realize. And no one will tell them that. I mean, I'll tell them that. Mm-hmm. But Bernie was, as you say, Bernie was on national television last night. He could have done like a whole other thing at that debate than just try to, cover the same ground and litigate the same issues and corner Biden, as you said. I think that was a real missed opportunity for him. I think the setup in some respects really favored Biden, but I don't think that Bernie figured out, well, what can I do in this particular setting at this particular moment to broaden my coalition, to challenge my party, to challenge the conventional wisdom, and to redefine what it means to be a progressive in the United States of America in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, it's been talked about. I mean, it was talked about in 2016. I mean, Cornel West and Chris Hedges said he had the opportunity to leave in 2016 and start a third party or just run as an independent and bring a bunch of people with him, and he didn't. And, and I see what you're saying. I know how, I remember JB telling me how Bloomberg got elected, and it really engaged a lot of independent voters. I'm not a fan of billionaires. I think they're criminals, and if he's friends with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, I got nothing for that guy. But I see what you're saying, that there is a lot of independents out there. 42% of the country, calls themselves independents. And there's also the 100-some million people that just don't vote because they don't think you don't represent me. These two parties don't have it. They don't care about me. I don't have time. And there was an opportunity because the whole country is in quarantine. So you could have made this case in more dynamic and unique ways rather than just, as you said, sort of just. I give Bernie credit, like he's been making the same point for 3 decades or more. So I give him credit for that, but he really should have, in my opinion, been more like, here's what I'm going to do right now, today for everyone, and it'll be a part of my bigger, revolution of fixing like he could have said, we need to fix all of it, the political system, the pharmaceutical companies that buy politicians. I mean, he alluded to it. He says Joe Biden gets a lot of money from them. And then, so I just don't know. Yeah, I don't know if last night is going to be the thing and this, because we're like, everybody said this was going to happen this morning, Monday, the stock market tanked, dropped hard. They had to close it. Maybe they reopened it again. I don't know. But they've been pumping trillions of dollars into, and it's done nothing. It's been like not even a speed bump. And they're still haggling over this little handful of billions of dollars for us while the banks get trillions of dollars yet again.
Yeah.
And people, I'm mystified that people can listen to Joe Biden say, well, we had to bail the banks out. No, Joe, you could have given all that money to the people and they could have paid off all their debts and stayed in their homes, and the banks would have got their money eventually. But instead you gave it to the banks and you let 6 million foreclosures happen. You let that, you let the banks profit from that. And so I don't know. Like, where do you see this? You know, I mean, some of the poll, like, how is this global pandemic something we've never seen in any of our lifetimes? We've got some primaries. Some states have pushed their primaries down.
Yes.
Some places, Illinois and Ohio, like the governor, I believe, of Illinois is like, no restaurants, no nothing, but polling places are open.
Yeah.
Does that mean the younger voter that doesn't think they're going to die from this is going to go to the polls, but the older voter is going to stay home who would have voted for Biden? I mean, like, well, how do you see this? I mean, how do you see this shaking out? And how do you see this going into a convention? And is this pandemic? I mean, are they going to shut down Milwaukee in July? Like, how do you see this?
That's a good question, because look, the disruption, the disruption of everything is what's on the agenda now, and the election process is not going to be exempt from that, not in the slightest. And that's another reason, by the way, I think the whole opportunity to push the democracy issue in this context is really important, because look, the issue here is who's setting the priorities in this country. Who's setting the priorities for how money gets spent, or what gets developed, what gets waitlisted, what gets taken care of early, what gets pushed to the back burner. And I think part of what the American people are experiencing right now is that the whole chain of priority decision-making is really off. And we are so poorly equipped to respond to this crisis, which, you know, people who are experts in the field have been saying, you know, for years and years and probably decades, that things like this are going to happen. It's just the nature of what the world is like now. And so if you're going to raise the issue of priorities, you have to also raise the issue of who is setting the priorities, which is where the democracy issue comes in. And I think that part of what we're experiencing right now is what happens when priorities are being set by a set of special interests that live and operate through both major political parties, with the increasing exclusion of the American people from the democratic process and the priority making process. So that's what we're facing right now. And so for example, I watched the president's press conference on Friday when they came out to the Rose Garden to declare the emergency and had all the folks with him.
Rest easy, Jackie. A Google website's going to take care of this problem. Didn't that make you feel better?
Yeah. No, actually, I don't even know how to use a Google website. But they roll out, you know, the corporate community, business leaders are up there. So, and they're talking about a private-public partnership. So my first reaction to seeing that is, well, that is great, because there's a huge amount of wealth and a huge amount of capacity and a huge amount of infrastructure in the private sector. And wow, let's get that mobilized now in a real way to support the public sector in dealing with this crisis. But then what happens is that you see the guy from Walmart get up and he says, we're going to give you our parking lots. So on the one hand, yeah, okay, we need the parking lots so that we can do drive-by testing. That's like a good thing. But what else are you doing? Is that all you're doing? Walmart, for goodness sake, all you're doing is giving the American people a parking lot? The guy from Roche, a drug company, gets up. They're really excited because they've relaxed all of the clearance requirements by the FDA, et cetera, and so forth, so they can fast track making more tests so that we can have testing capacity, right, for the coronavirus. But does the guy from Roche say, and we're going to do this at cost so that the American people can have the tools that they need to weather this storm, and we're going to completely, no, they don't say that at all. And obviously they're going to make a killing on this. So on the one hand, what you see is that the Trump administration calls up the business community, brings them to the table. That's good. But then they don't put any demands on them. And that is a failure of leadership. Now, if I had been Bernie Sanders going into the debate last night, I would have talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have talked about that because, frankly, there's not that. I know he's in a Democratic primary process, so presumably he has to get people to decide to vote for him rather than Joe Biden. In my opinion, the way to do that is not to attack Joe Biden, but to provide some actual leadership, to say some things about what the kind of demand that the American people need to put on the corporate sector to step up in the midst of this crisis. But right now, we talk about infrastructure that we don't have. We don't have the infrastructure to do that because everything is mediated by the parties. Everything is mediated by the political class. Everything is mediated by the elite. I mean, and people have been saying this for a long time, Graham, and you know this, the real divide in America is not a left-right divide. It's a top-down divide.
Mm-hmm.
It's the elites and everyone else. And on the one hand, Bernie is trying to address that and thread the needle there. But on the other hand, as you're saying, and I really agree with this, he won't take on the institutions that he's a part of that are preserving that status quo. So when you say, where does this go? I mean, I'll tell you some thoughts that I have about it. I mean, look, this election cycle is going to be this election cycle. And, you know, I was reading this morning some stories about how the Trump approach is costing him support now among certain elements of his base, and that people are feeling insecure about that. And that's not a surprise. And maybe the Democrats are going to be able to take advantage of that. And win people over to their cause and project a more stabilizing, you know, more empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
more competent leadership capacity. I mean, surely it's the Democrats to lose, and they're going to take their shot at doing that. Whether they're going to have a convention, you know, that they bring thousands of people to, well, who knows? Who knows if Americans are going to be allowed to gather at that size event? We don't even know that. But to some degree, the die is already cast on that because unless something very, very unexpected happens in the next round of elections, Biden is going to be the nominee. And Biden is going to choose a woman vice presidential candidate, as he announced on the debate last night. And that's going to be the Democratic ticket. And that's what the campaign is going to be in November. But I think, though, in a way, the bigger issue is, does all of this experience open the door to the following? I'll put it in the form of a slogan: independent in 2024. Have the parties exhausted their capacity to mobilize and deserve public trust? This situation is a big test of that. And it's a serious test of that. And moreover, you know, it's not as if these cycles of trust, distrust return everything to the same level. Every time there is a decline, an erosion of public trust, even when there's some kind of recovery, which is what Biden is selling, right? It doesn't come back to the same level that it started from. And there is, if you will, underneath the swing cycles, there's a steady erosion of public trust in government and in the parties as governing institutions. So what comes out of that, you know, out of 2020, whoever wins the election, do some forces come together that have refused to come together before? You know, in the 1990s, I was part of the National Reform Party. That was a left, center, right coalition of people who had no business, based on traditional politics, being in a room together, much less building a party together. But there we were. And we found a way to do it for 6 or 7 years before the Democratic and Republican parties in succession found a way to destroy us, you know. And we learned a lot of lessons from that. But, you know, are we coming to another one of those junctures? We might be. We really might be.
Well, it'll take this calamity. I mean, if people can't work and can't pay their bills and they're on quarantine, and if this thing spikes, they're saying we're 2 weeks away from spiking the way it did in Italy. and
Yeah.
hospital beds. And, there was one study I read Friday that, 40% of the people, 40 to 70% of Americans might get infected, and if even just 1% of them die, we're talking about several million people. And the people
Yeah.
are going to be like, I'm done with this government. I don't know. I don't want that to happen, but I don't know what it's going to take for Americans to really go, wow, nobody cares about us. I mean, I argue more with the neoliberals who really think Biden, and they just have completely forgotten about 8 years of Obama and Biden taking us from 2 wars to 7. No one got prosecuted from the banks. Iceland put their bankers in jail. We didn't do anything. This financial collapse that is happening is because they didn't do any regulation at all. I mean, and so America's going to really have to wake up to the thing that many of us independents have been talking about, and people such as yourself, you've done it for your whole professional career, and hats off to you for that, have been saying this lesser of two evils crap. As my friend Ron Placone says, the lesser of two evils is still evil. So,
but don't you think, let me ask you something though. Don't you think that the left in America is suffering from a failure to reconsider its own strategies and tactics?
Absolutely.
Do you think that?
100%. 100%. Because after 2016, the left didn't go, and the media, jumped on board with this at the behest of the Clinton cabal of it was all Russia, Russia, Russia. Rachel Maddow didn't spend 3 years talking about the corruption of the DNC, and she's sort of the hero of the neoliberal left. She just talked about how it was all Russia, and the left refused to see why they lost. They made crybaby excuses, Putin and this, that, and the other thing. They refused to see why Trump won. They all got Trump derangement syndrome, and they refused to see that he ran as a populist. Yes, racist, xenophobic, sexist, absolutely. But he was standing in front of closed factories that got crushed by NAFTA in the middle of the country saying, I'm going to give you your job back, while Hillary was flying from coast to coast doing 10,000 a plate dinners and calling those working class people deplorable. And the left refuses to see that. And when you out left a neoliberal, they don't go, wow, man, I'm on the wrong side of this. They flip out and act just like some right winger that calls you a libtard snowflake. They react in the same way. So their refusal to wake up to the corruption of their own, they sit there and say, oh, the Republicans are awful. And I go, yep, I agree. And then they think their party is somehow better, and just get Biden into the any blue will do crowd. I don't know how to talk to them.
Well, in a way, I think part of what we're living through is the era of crony capitalism and crony socialism. And what the American people are sick of is cronyism. So how do we address that? And how do we wrest control of our political system, our culture, our economy, and the way that we live as Americans? How do we wrest control of that from the cronies and go about a process of rebuilding all of that? Because I think that's really what's on the table here. I do. And that's why I think this coming together, this is why the thing, going back to the debate last night, it was the part that was fascinating rather than boring, was that was really coming out so strongly. The Biden's line, we have to deal with this now, never mind these systemic issues. And then Bernie saying, it's really all about the systemic issues. And the American people are kind of sitting there going, well, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do now?
I think the American people, this pandemic is showing how bad, corrupt capitalism is. All of the exacerbation of this, a pandemic can start for any number of reasons. The exacerbation of it, the failure to deal with it, is the corrupt system of capitalism. And I've posted the fact that they did a $50 billion stimulus plan for this. They voted down Tulsi's UBI thing, which that would have, UBI for every single American would be $330 billion a month. 5 months of that is $1.5 trillion, the exact amount of money they just gave to Wall Street, and they keep pumping into it. I'm just trying to explain to people, just in real dollars and cents, they don't care about us. The 1% does not care. And so I don't know, maybe this crisis is the thing that's going to make people wake up to see this thing, as you talk about, the cronyism, socialism for the 1% and, rugged individualism for everybody else. And they're seeing that they're not being taken care of. China, Japan, South Korea, free healthcare came in, handled this. China's numbers are going down. South Korea's numbers are going down. And so I don't know. I hope this is sort of the wake up for everybody. But we don't know day to day what's going to, it's.
No. I don't think of it though as just a wake up situation. I think it's both an opportunity and also in some respects a responsibility of progressives to offer some new pathways, new ways of engaging these issues, new ways of thinking about these issues. Because you well know, yes, crony capitalism is a huge issue. Crony socialism is my term for how the left chooses to decide what's considered a legitimate left approach and what isn't. And now, speaking as an independent and somebody who's done a lot of work both in independent politics and in left-right coalitions, I've been dealing with being blacklisted by the American left, which has taken political correctness to a really startlingly upsetting degree. The political correctness police of the left is as bad as the thought police of the right. That's a very dangerous situation because the left is supposed to lead. The left is supposed to create new pathways for action, for empowerment, for democratization, and for redistribution of wealth. But it has no new ideas, and it is over and over and over again brought to heel by the Democratic Party. And unless and until, there's voices that come that are willing to talk about this and that are willing to build and to take some risks and to, the Bloomberg piece in New York, that was a big risk that we took, where the people that I worked with that, that ran Mike's campaign and that made that partnership, that was a big risk that we took for all the reasons that you're saying. The guy he was and is a social liberal and a progressive. He's a billionaire businessman and all of that. But mainly, he wasn't a Democrat, and he wanted to run as an independent, and he wanted to raise a set of issues that had to do with the way the political process works in New York. And we took that risk, and we did it, and we got him elected. Now he won't talk about. Now he only wants to talk about how, well, this was true until about 6 months ago. He only wanted to talk about how Rudy Giuliani got him elected. Now he doesn't want to talk about Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
Now it was kind of like a virgin birth somehow that Mike got elected. But I was there. I know how it happened. I know who did it. I know who came together to make it happen. And that's a story that has yet to fully come out. But my main point about it in this context, and to me, it's so important that you're having this conversation on your show. And I really, want to congratulate you and commend you for that, not just for having me on, but being willing to talk about these issues with the public. The left is in a straitjacket, and in a way, Bernie's constraints are symbolic of that entire paradigm. And, going back to why I wrote the speech, I wanted to use my skills as a playwright and a theater person to give him a different performance. There's a different performance he could be doing. And it could be historically so important and so impactful. But he can't, he won't, he won't.
Well, everyone, a lot of my fans and followers and other indie journalists, folks, everyone's been saying, like, it might be time for peaceful nonviolent resistance. It's time for like an independent coalition. We've seen this, like the anti-war people. A lot of the people that voted for Trump, people don't realize this on the left. A lot of people voted for Trump because he ran on an anti-interventionist stance. Because it's the middle of the country's kids that went to Iraq and Afghanistan. It wasn't the kids who went to private schools in LA and New York. They didn't have to
Oh,
go,
sure.
you know.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunities here, and I'm glad you brought that up about your history of putting like on paper, you know, coalitions that don't make sense. Like there's a lot about Tucker Carlson I do not like or agree with, but the guy's been right on Syria. I mean, he's been right on Julian Assange. So there's
Yes,
something to discuss, you know.
absolutely. No,
So I really
absolutely.
appreciate your time, Jackie, and all the work that you've done. Why don't you tell our audience where people can go online and follow you and find your work?
Oh, thank you. The organization is called Independent Voting, and you can find us at independentvoting.org. And we'd love to hear from your followers and your viewers, and get people connected to other independents all around the country. We're really an engine for up from the bottom independent organizing. We have affiliates and leaders in 40 plus states, and we're really looking to achieve a level of respect and recognition for independent voters who we think can be an engine and are acting as an engine for reforming and transforming our political system.
Excellent. And I say this to everybody out there watching. I always say get involved. And, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with Bernie yet. That doesn't mean we all quit and go home. We all talked about this. Bernie and electoral politics are just one little thing, and it's a slim shot because the electoral system is so corrupt. So go to Jackie's website, get involved in an organization. It's getting involved in these organizations on a local level and building these coalitions are what we're going to be able to, how we're going to be able to affect real change. So thank you, Jackie, for being on the show. I'm going to put a link to her website in the show notes and also a link to that speech that she wrote, which was fantastic. Like, share, and subscribe. I don't know if we're doing tour dates. I have no idea what's happening with that. So just keep following me. I'm home, so I'm going to be making a lot of videos. So thanks for watching. And again, Jackie, thank you so much for taking your time.
Thanks for having me, Graham. I really appreciate it.
Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell notification button and the subscribe button, even if you've done it before, because they're unsubscribing, many of you, every day. Watch the ads all the way through. If you click skip ad, I don't get paid. Also, support us at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood. Rockfin.com is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. All my videos are on Rockfin ad-free. Thanks for watching.